was a very difficult decision to make, but you don't take that lightly. You don't take two big organisations to court like that if you think that you're going to lose.
In 1994, the actress Gillian Tailforth sued the Sun newspaper and the police over a front-page story claiming that she'd been caught having oral sex with her boyfriend Jeff Knights in his Range Rover in a lay-by on the A1. A story she claimed was untrue.
When we first went to see Michael Beloff, our barrister, he said, "Have you got any skeletons in your cupboard?" And, you know, I racked my brain, I couldn't think of anything at all. And he said, "You know, you have to tell me now, because these will come out. If you've got anything, believe you me, George Carman will get them, and he will find, and you have to tell me now."
I told her that she would be pursued uphill and down dale by a vigorous and expert cross-examiner who would be seeking to break her down and who would use every legitimate trick of the trade to do so.
The man Gillian Tailforth would be facing in court was George Carman QC, one of the most successful and celebrated advocates in the business, with a reputation for fierce cross-examination.
My approach to cross-examination is sometimes to test the truthfulness of the witness, and of course that may be a long process, and it may be a painful process for the witness. But the popular idea that the barrister should bully the witness or hector the witness is totally misconceived. You're only going to offend the jury and the judge if you are offensive to a witness. But what you have to do is control the witness if the witness seeks to avoid the question.
Gillian Tailforth assumed the jury would reach its verdict on the evidence alone. But in the theatre of the British court, nothing's that simple. Jurors aren't scientists. The trial isn't a laboratory. And advocates try to persuade jurors to consider factors which may have little to do with the evidence. Sometimes the result may seem unjust, leaving its victims confused and cynical.
At the start, the odds seemed to be on Tailforth's side.
Certainly, one realized that Miss Tailforth was a popular heroine, a great entertainer. There are many millions of people who watch EastEnders and would sympathize with her. And the star quality, therefore, might weigh heavily with the jury.
Mrs. Beale.
All right.
But during the case, Carman turned her ability as an actress to his advantage. He accused her of playing the part of humiliated victim, a role she'd played before.
Trouble just as it is today. Mrs. Beale, it really does begin to seem that whenever you get into a tight corner, you do not cry wolf, you cry rape.
You bastard. And I just looked at him and I said, "How dare you?" I remember my word. I just said to him, "Just because I'm an actress does not mean I'm a liar. I am here today as Gillian Tailforth, and that is the part I am playing. Gillian Tailforth, not Kathy Beale. You're referring to the wrong person, Mr. Carman." I thought it was absolutely an incredible question to ask me, but it had everybody listening. There I was. Yes, hang on a minute. She did play a rape, do this court scene in EastEnders where she was raped, and that did go through her mind. Did she actually say those words? Is she just relaying every single sentence?
He cross-examined, as he always does, very hard and very stylishly and very eloquently. But my feeling was that he hadn't really laid a glove on her. I mean, there are occasions when skilled cross-examiners can break someone down, even, it happened at least once in even my own career, get them simply to admit something that they've been denying at the start. That never happened.
But the case was about to take a dramatic turn. The Sun had discovered a videotape whose existence had not been suspected when the trial began. It showed Gillian Tailforth at an actor's party 6 years previously. It had nothing to do with the alleged incident on the A1. But Carman told the jury it cast doubt on her credibility. The video showed Tailforth and her friends indulging in drunken horseplay.
There was a point where we were all mucking about, people picking up bits of food, and I went to, there was like like German sausage there, and I picked it up and held it to my mouth as a Jimmy Savile sort of thing. Went, "How's about that then, guys and girls? I must get a little battery for that." And that's all I did. And George Carman then said, when he cross-questioned me again, that I was acting out oral sex with this sausage. And in no way whatsoever was I doing that.
In George Carman's hands, What Tailforth saw as harmless fun was to prove devastating. She collapsed in shock at the jury's verdict. It found in favour of the Sun newspaper. She had believed the video was completely irrelevant.
I was absolutely devastated. I was so upset. It's more of a theatre, it's a big game. It's just, well, it is, it's just a big drama. And somewhere along the lines, there's the evidence, and theirs is over here and yours is over here. And there's so much going on, a big drama going on around it, that the evidence gets lost somewhere. And people in the end start playing the game, and the jury start playing the game, and people start listening to that, and they forget to listen to the evidence and the facts that go on.
The fact that she was prepared to display herself behaving in that way, albeit at an actor's party, albeit a few years ago, showed that she wasn't quite the shy lady that she'd so far portrayed to the jury.
Gillian Tailforth had fallen victim to a classic legal tactic, undermining a witness by dredging up aspects of their previous life, with the jury invited to believe that a single peccadillo devalues everything said on oath.
I think it's consistent with the law's general approach to credibility. You know, false in one thing, false in everything. If you behave like this on one occasion, you always behave like this in every context, whatever the circumstances. It's a very simplistic view of how people behave. And it's difficult to see that any of it bears any relation at all to the simple issue, can you trust this person when they're giving evidence on their oath to a court of law?
Let me ask you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury.
Juries are told to try cases on the evidence alone, but barristers know there's more to it than that. It's not only about persuading a jury, they say you have to entertain them and get them to like you. Sometimes it seems more like a theatrical performance.
When I put my wig and gown on, I'm a different person to the person who would go out on a Friday night with my friends. The wig and gown, I'm a barrister, I go into court. I'm a cross between an actor and a salesman, really.
The arbiters of a verdict are the jury, and to that extent they're an audience, and for anyone who seeks to make a point with an audience, you have to entertain them and get them on your side.
This theatre isn't lost on jurors.
When he was summing up, for instance, he was very passionate about it, and you felt that it was like his life was on the line, never mind that of the defendant. And that warmed us to him.
The lady barrister had a habit of raising her eyes to the ceiling at some points and throwing her hands into the air as the other barrister was speaking or making a point. And I felt this was very over the top, very pantomime-like.
I want to examine what you said in more detail.
Some of a trial's most dramatic moments come during cross-examination, when the barrister tries to attack witnesses using a variety of recognised techniques.
If you get someone who has murdered, and normally it's in domestic circumstances, someone they know well, and if they then go and leave the scene, and you say to them, when you left the house, was Mary Jones alive or dead? It's a very difficult question to answer, because whatever they say is going to put them in a very bad light. Because if the person was alive, why didn't they call the ambulance? And if the person was dead, did they not care?
If you can show that the written document has been lost, then I can use the witness...
Another tactic is the unexpected opening gambit.
Well, I once had a very tough witness who was a supergrass, and he looked like a professional boxer with a broken nose and heavily tattooed forearms, which he was showing in a short-sleeved shirt, and he took up a very defiant stance. And my first question to him was, are you now, or have you ever been, a practicing homosexual? Now, that was an inquiry that was consistent with my case. It took him a little by surprise, and he showed his surprise in the sense that you could have knocked him down with a feather. I don't think that he ever completely recovered from that start.
The thrust of advocacy, the testing of evidence by skilled and competent advocates, the judge acting as umpire, if we're talking of a jury, then I think that is the best system we've devised for getting at the truth.
the rules of evidence require...
This adversarial contest has been at the heart of our legal system for centuries. British justice is supposedly the finest in the world, and there's no evidence that other systems, where there's no cross-examination, work better. But we've got little room for complacency.
The problem is that laypersons trying to assess credibility are looking for indicators like fidgeting, not looking people straight in the eye, hesitancy, stumbling, muttering, and so on, all of which are associated with anxiety. And anxiety, of course, is the very thing you would expect an appearance in court to produce, unless people are used to it.
You think you put on the radio tillit? I think I would have.
One of the witnesses' body language was very interesting. He was sort of jumping about from one foot to the other and didn't know what to do with his hands. And, of course, he could just be very nervous being in the witness box, but it didn't look very good. It looked as if he was very unsure of himself and wasn't maybe not telling the truth.
Sometimes, despite what I was hearing from a particular witness, I couldn't help feeling that I didn't believe what they were saying because of the way they looked or the way they spoke.
Jurors use these visual signs to support their stereotypes of the guilty or innocent person. But barristers can advise their clients on how to look more believable.
Jurors are very astute, and if you've got a long trial, and you've got a witness who comes in a different suit every day, which has happened in a long corruption case I did, the jury kept nudging every day because they were wondering how on earth this defendant, who was supposedly on a groundsman's income, managed to come to court every day in a different suit, quite an expensive suit, over a period of weeks.
A good advocate knows his client mustn't simply look the part, he also needs to win over the jury. There are ways of evoking sympathy for a person accused of even the most heinous crime.
It may be a reference to children, maybe a reference to the deceased. It may even be the cat or the dog, which they haven't seen for a while. I just want to see what will make that person cry. So there's a chance of breaking down this veneer which has been built up during this period in custody, so that the jury may have a truthful glimpse of what that person is really like underneath it.
The usually flamboyant Edwina Currie thought carefully about her impact on the jury when she sued the Observer newspaper. It had compared her to a fictional Euro MP, so ambitious she was prepared to commit murder to get on.
Did you give any thought to your appearance in court?
Oh, I wore black. Of course I wore black. One had to look in a very sober, sensible way what one was trying to portray. I very seldom wear black. I normally wear fairly bright colours. But it was important not to look flashy in any way.
A demure Mrs. Currie presented herself as a respectable wife and mother, a woman who'd be hurt by suggestions that she would neglect either to further her career. But first, she had to face George Carman, who appeared for the Observer.
It felt like he thought I was a piano, and he was a good piano player. And all he had to do was kind of flex his fingers and push up his sleeves and sit down and start playing. And I ain't like that.
Carman tried to attack her image using a spoof punch item which supposedly depicted her in lingerie. But Currie remained composed, and in response to his suggestions, looked offended and hurt.
I had to be calm, quiet, and not move around a lot. And I do tend to move a lot. I know I do it on TV and so on. So, you know, you just put your hands on the witness box and you steady yourself. And then you can look steadily. And the jury over there is looking at you. And they know you're steady. And they can also see, if you're shown something that you don't like, that actually you know, whites of the knuckles and all that sort of thing. In fact, given the way I felt, I wasn't pretending very much.
She certainly was more demure than one expected Edwina Currie to be, because having seen her on television on a number of occasions, and having indeed met her since socially, she clearly is a lady used to expressing her own point of view pretty forcefully. So she was carefully in control in the witness box, but she's an experienced public speaker, and that came across throughout her evidence.
Currie's performance succeeded. She won her case and £5,000 in damages.
The whole problem is that people have expectations of how anyone in the witness box should behave. Defendants ought to be humble and anxious, and therefore if they appear arrogant and too confident, the jury may take an adverse view. Particularly, it's thought that if anybody, whether it's an advocate or the defendant or anybody else, presumes too much by anticipating that there's only one way the verdict can go and that the jury is bound to agree with them, human nature being as it is, the juries are often thought to take a dim view of that and say, well, we're the jury and we'll make up our own minds.
Jonathan Jones, a middle-class recruitment consultant, didn't fit the stereotype of a murderer. In 1993, he was charged with killing his girlfriend Cheryl's parents, Meghan and Harry Toos, at their farmhouse in Wales. But there was no direct evidence to link him with the killing.
The prosecution case was weak. It was based on circumstantial evidence. There was no direct evidence to link Jonathan Jones with the killings. And we were convinced that Jonathan Jones would be acquitted.
But Jones didn't know what barristers know, that the right image is all important.
He'd had a prison-style haircut, which didn't present him to his best advantage, and he looked rather emaciated and poorly kempt, and it didn't create the impression, the real impression of Jonathan Jones, which is normality, decent, straightforward person. It didn't create that, and quite clearly the jury had regard to that, because they had to weigh up his look as they did his evidence.
There was another problem. Jones didn't behave the way the jury might have expected him to. He didn't conform to the stereotype of the humble defendant.
He used to carry every day his own depositions because he wanted to be a part of the defence team, and they would look and he would come in with his bags and start, you know, which bundle are we on today then, which is the next witness. So he'd get his bundle ready and get his pen out, and here would come the little yellow notes which he would be ready to send to me, and things like that. And I don't know how the jury felt about it, whether they felt that he was sure of himself, confident, too confident.
Even as he waited for the verdict, Jones failed to realise the impression he had made on the jury.
And I was walking up and down, pacing up and down. He said, "What on earth's wrong with you, Leila?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, they're out such a long time, I'm not sure." "Well, why are you worried?" I said, "Well, you could be convicted." And the look on his face, he could not believe me. He just did not believe me. I don't think for one moment that man ever thought he would be convicted.
But Jones was convicted and given 2 life sentences. Earlier this year, he was acquitted on appeal after new evidence came to light.
He had no doubt in his mind that he'd be acquitted, and because he came from a fairly respectable background, he had faith in the system and trusted that the judicial process and the safety nets that they employ would work to his advantage. And that comfort factor was something that Leila had to get across to him, was not something that he should hold too long in his head, because the system's extremely cynical.
Jonathan Jones was an innocent man who lost his liberty, partly because he failed to give a good performance in the courtroom. But the question always put to defence barristers is slightly different. How can their consciences allow them to use their skills to try to acquit a defendant they believe may well be guilty?
In cases where I've got instructions and I've thought, oh, this is a load of rubbish, this is never going to wash. You go into court, you cross-examine the witnesses, and all of a sudden, what the defendant has told you is right. So I've stopped judging. Experience has taught me, you take his instructions, you put them.
I'm biased in favour of my client. That's my task, is to represent him best I may. Prosecution got someone to represent them. The judge there to hold the scales of justice between both sides. It's for the jury to decide what they believe.
In fact, it's one of the most serious crimes in the books.
But the duty to fight for the client can lead barristers to do things which stay on their conscience.
As a young barrister, I defended a man, not with any great personal enthusiasm, on a sexual charge involving young children, extremely unpleasant. He was acquitted, and then 3 or 4 years later, he turned up again on equally grave charges of a similar kind. I did actually feel unpleasant It felt unpleasant to me that he'd been acquitted the first time, because I thought if he'd been convicted the first time, then he wouldn't have done serious harm to children again on the second occasion. So that stuck in my mind for years, actually, and I felt deeply upset about that.
Few barristers have built such a reputation as fighters for their clients as Ronald Thwaites.
Either you take the case on and you fight it as if you mean it, or you don't bother. There's no halfway measures, as far as I'm concerned. I believe that there are no hopeless cases, only hopeless barristers. There is always something that you can find in the case if you have to, and you're committed to doing the job for a man who insists that he is not guilty.
In 1987, he defended Charles McGee, a man charged with attempted murder.
He was known for his violent streak, and he carried a lot of sway in the town amongst local criminals and in local nightclubs, and there weren't many people that would say no to him.
McGee, who had a criminal record, had threatened a doorman after being refused entry to a nightclub in Luton. Then he disappeared. Within an hour, a masked man drew up at the club, armed with a semi-automatic pistol, and fired at point-blank range, shooting the doorman in the face. Then the gunman sped off. McGee was charged with attempted murder. Although the evidence was circumstantial, the case against him looked strong. He disappeared straight after the shooting, and he'd already threatened the doorman. But his barrister, Ronald Thwaites, saw an opening in the case. He chose a deliberately low-key strategy to try to get McGee off.
I know that circumstantial evidence, standing alone, often does not impress juries. And I decided that this was a case better to play short than long. Although, if my memory serves me, the client's instincts were to have a go at everybody. And I think perhaps he thought that I was the man for the case when he decided that that's what he wanted to do. However, my advice prevailed, to take it short.
The case was in fact listed to run for 2 weeks, and in fact only lasted for 3 days. We expected the defence to attack all of the prosecution witnesses and to cross-examine all of them in depth. Ronald Thwaites did not take this stance with the witnesses. He only brought out the facts that he wanted to bring out.
Thwaites barely cross-examined any of the witnesses. He relied mainly on his closing speech to the jury. How could they be sure his client was the masked gunman? He also raised doubts about the credibility of Superintendent Roscoe, claiming he may have misheard what McGee told him about his alibi when they discussed the case in the cells.
He did his job in a highly competent professional way, which you would expect from somebody of the calibre of Ronald Thwaites. He held the jury in his sway, he made the points that he wanted to make, he put forward McGee's case in a very professional, persuasive way.
When the jury returned with its verdict, McGee was jubilant.
After he was found not guilty, there was a period where he thanked the jury profusely for their correct verdict as he saw it, and as the jury then left and he reverted back and put on a red nose, Red Nose Day was nearby, and gave a V sign to me and other members of the prosecution that were there.
5 weeks later, a bank in Hemel Hempstead was robbed by an armed gang. An off-duty policeman tackled one of the robbers and was shot at point-blank range. PC Frank Mason was dead on arrival in hospital. The man who pulled the trigger was Charles McGee. How did you feel when you heard that PC Mason had been killed?
Well, I was chilled to the core by it. The hairs went up on the back of my neck. I was horrified at the news. And I paused and reflected whether it was any part of my fault that this had happened. But were one to take on one's shoulders such responsibilities, it would be impossible ever to act for people in serious cases without worrying and wondering what they were going to do for the rest of their lives.
No system is perfect, and there is no simple blueprint for making our system more effective at establishing the truth. But does the drama of the courtroom deliver the wrong verdict too often?
I have no affection for child murderers or bank robbers or drug barons. In different circumstances, with a different practice behind me, I may have prosecuted them. But what about those who fail in the prosecutions, who don't do their work, who fail to cross-examine defendants effectively so that they are acquitted? Are they at fault? Is the judge at fault in the way that he sums up, if he's too liberal in his comments? Whose responsibility is it? We, the defense advocates, are always easy targets to criticize. But why should we carry the responsibility any more than anyone else? The system sometimes works, we hope, more of the time than it fails.